Haruhi Suzumiya, what a series I've grown to know. Whether you're one of the ones who likes it or not, you have to accept the fact that it's gotten a lot of people into anime. Its popularity is something to marvel at. This is truly one of those shows that has something strange about it pop up every day. Is all the hype really worth it though? Is the show truly that great to have a cult following like this? Let's take a look at it today. I'll be going over the series as a whole, and I will be mentioning the manga as well, since I have read it myself. Although since the manga and anime are very similar, going over both would be fairly redundant, so I'm just going to be going over both of them in this review. So without further ado, let's get to the review. Haruhi Suzumiya had first started out as a novel written by Naguru Tanigawa and was published by Kadokawa Shoten. These novels, as much as I know their presence, will not be brought up in the review itself since I have not read through any of these. Although I do hear that they differ from the manga and anime, so they may be something fans may want to look into if they have not already. Soon after the novel's popularity, Kadokawa Shoten had published 2 manga adaptations of the novel. One of these was illustrated by Makoto Mizuno. Although this adaptation merely lasted from May to December of 2004. The second adaptation, which is the one we know today, was illustrated by Gaku Tsukano. This manga series is still running to this day, and I happen to own many of these myself. Not too long after the manga's popularity had sparked, we were introduced to the anime adaptation produced by the Japanese animation studio Kyoto Animation, and it was directed by Tatsuya Ishihara. The original series ran for 14 episodes, but eventually returned with a second season, which had a mere 7 unique episodes, this not counting the unbearably long, endless 8 stories, unneeded parts. I'll explain this later. The series also had a movie based off the 7th, 8th, and 9th issues of the manga. There were also various spin-offs, such as the Melancholy of Haruhi-chan, and although this is very much the same series, I don't consider it worth bringing up in this review, even though it is a much more chibi version of the original show. The anime of Haruhi Suzumiya was broadcast in April of 2006 to July of 2006 and had re-aired in 2009 and was directed by Tatsuya Ishihara. Was published by Kyoto Animation and was licensed here in America by Bandia Entertainment. Stars the vocal casts of Crispin Freeman as Kyon, Wendy Lee as Haruhi Suzumiya, Michelle Ruff as Yuki Nagato, Stephanie Shea as Mikuru Asahina, and Johnny Young Bosch as Itsuki Koizumi. Kyon is a teenager who had just entered high school and is within that part of his life where he has lost all belief in the extraordinary, although still clinging on to that last hope that it may all come raining down on him one day. Within his first day, he meets up with a beautiful high schooler, Haruhi Suzumiya, who doesn't seem to be the most normal of the students.
I'm Haruhi Suzumiya from East Junior High. First off, I'm not interested in ordinary people. But if any of you are aliens, time travelers, or espers, please come see me. That is all.
Is that supposed to be funny? There stood before me this amazingly beautiful girl.
They soon start making a connection despite Kyone's interests, and start pulling together a group for the weird and out there known as the SOS Brigade, and they soon start pulling in 3 other members. These characters being Yuki Nagato, Mikuru Asahina, and Itsuki Koizumi. As these members are pulled in, Kyon is slowly told of their relation to the supernatural, and as to what the reason is being here. Yuki Nagato being an alien, or as she explains it, a human vessel sent from the Data Overseer to oversee Haruhi Suzumiya.
To the Data Integration Thought Entity, the 3rd planet in this solar system, this planet held no special value. However, the current inhabitants of Earth, as it is known by your kind, developed a cognitive ability that could be considered intelligence. Consequently, the significance of the planet increased. There was the possibility that your kind might provide an answer in overcoming the inert evolution the entity is experiencing. Throughout the universe, it is common for organic life forms to develop a consciousness. Human beings from Earth were the only creatures whose consciousness evolved into intellect.
Nagato is the only one of the group to frequently use her powers and becomes the group's get out of jail free card, which does tend to bother me a bit. Mikuru, being the next, is a time traveler who was sent back in time but now finds herself also watching over Haruhi. Little is told of who or what Mikuru is, since most of what she is classified and is never really explained except for the fact that she came from the future and is now unable to go back due to the presence of Haruhi Suzumiya.
Years ago from the current time in this plane. We arrived in the past to investigate, and we were surprised once we got here. No matter how hard we tried, we couldn't go further back in time from that plane. The conclusion was that there had to be a large time gap between the time planes. It wasn't until recently that we found the thing that caused it. That is, recently in the future where I come from.
So what is the reason?
Miss Suzumiya.
Finally, we have Koizumi. He's the last one to enter the group, and he sports a very optimistic attitude and is the final overseer to Haruhi. He is an Esper from an organization whom are used to close the spaces that Haruhi creates and prevent them from engulfing the world. The members also explain their knowledge of the others and the threat that Haruhi poses to the rest of humanity, her being some sort of god or something, since the three's explanations as to what she is vary slightly, but it seems to come down to her just being extremely dangerous to upset due to the fact that she can change reality. Her powers consist of the aforementioned ability to rend reality to her liking. She also has the ability to create gray spaces used, as Koizumi explained it.
When Miss Suzumiya's irritation level gets to a certain point, these giants suddenly appear. I think it's a form of stress relief for her, with those things acting out on her behalf and destroying stuff. I mean, she can't go causing riots or anything in the real world, so she creates a closed space and she's free to unleash her fury inside it. Don't you think that's logical? I mean, that thing really shouldn't be able to support its own weight.
These spaces are also linked to beings known as the Shinjin, but they seem to serve little purpose beyond explaining what goes on in these spaces, and really only ever appear twice in the series, both within the same story arc. If these spaces are left unattended by Koizumi or the rest of the Espers, they will soon engulf the world, leaving it something close to a playground for Haruhi's will. Haruhi's powers and the effects of these powers seem to be unbeknownst to her, as she does do these as a form of subconscious act to any negative emotions she may feel, such as sadness or grief. Kyon is also told that he has a connection to Haruhi, something of a key to unlocking Haruhi's potential, as well as being able to calm her down and stop the gray spaces from growing, which seems to baffle him since he is sort of a killjoy to Haruhi's games. Throughout the series, the group goes on adventures to please Haruhi and her strange taste in fun and excitement, and, despite Kyon's efforts, learning more of Haruhi and the others that found their way into this group. One thing I can say about the show is that it is fairly varied. Its show does offer a fairly good sense of urgency as well as a fairly well-placed plot, even if it does tend to rush itself from time to time. The plot does start out really strong, but does degrade after the first story arc. As the Melancholy arc ends, the series doesn't seem to have any of those big epic stories or even story canon, with the exception of the disappearance and possibly side stories. The plot does seem to rush itself a bit, as some of the stories could have been stretched out a bit longer. An example of this would be the Mysteric Sign arc, as it was one of the few arcs to actually have action in it, which I must say is very flashy and fun to watch, but it's so scarce that there's not much point in bringing it up. And it just seems to blow over, although the manga did have a slight continuation to this, but I found the ending of that to be a bit of a cop-out since the message it was hinting towards was pretty interesting before it was completely abolished. One exception to the rushing problem is one plot I will get to later. The overall plot is good, as it does offer a lot of variety to its stories, and it does keep me interested as it is very upbeat, and the characters are fairly interested, as I pointed out, as there are a good few to follow. Kyon does get a good amount of development, even though his actions at times do seem to contradict experiences he has had in the past. A good example of this is how he acts around Haruhi. I know he's trusted to be her voice of reason, but he seems to treat her actions as if how he acts has no bearing on her mood, though most of the time she does tend to shrug it off. There are times where his actions do tend to lead Haruhi into either rage or sadness, which does happen in the side of Haruhi Suzumiya story arc. This can be called nitpicking, but it does happen on multiple occasions, so it does tend to get on my nerves a bit from time to time. Crispin Freeman does get the generic teenage high schooler voice down really well. His voice does offer a good bit of praise, as in Kyon's monologues don't tend to drag really many times, like you'd expect them to, mostly because they consume most of his scenes. He's by no means a phenomenal character, but he is relatable since most of what he does is something you could find yourself doing, well, except disciplining a god. He's likable, but nothing to write home about. On the other hand, we have his polar opposite, Haruhi Suzumiya, the upbeat and hyperactive character of the show. She's also the closest thing we have to an antagonist, with the exception of a few minor characters such as Asakura. Haruhi is definitely a character to look into. She's by far the most popular thing to spawn from the show, even going as far as to spawn her own religion. I'd like to say that's a lie, but it's merely a fan thing. Although, in my opinion, she is as much the greatest aspect to the show as she is the most hindering aspect to the show. Despite her flaws, she is one of the few reasons I do revisit the show from time to time, as she is very optimistic and constantly wanting to push forward. She does tend to keep a fairly upbeat tone and is probably the only reason this plot kept moving forward and didn't really drag very often. I do like her, but she does have a good few flaws that I will point out later. The rest of the club is also fairly interesting and does sport my favorite character in the show, Yuki Nagato. Nagato is a hard character to explain as to why I like her. Is it the fact she acts as a guardian angel to the whole group instead of just Haruhi? I'm not sure, but her personality is something that I see is done very well. She has a very concealed and quiet attitude, and you would think that this would make her a very grim and depressing character, but she acts more as a computer than a downer. She is very much non-human, and she acts very emotionless, and throughout the whole series shows little more than small amounts of curiosity towards anything. She does seem to be my favorite character, as she isn't there to outright help them. She's there to watch and observe, and I find that far more interesting than most of the other characters. Next we have Mikuru Asahina, and I'm not really sure what to think of her, to be honest. She seems to be a generic damsel in distress, there just to play to Haruhi's games and cry. Although she does seem to have some redeeming factors that did keep me interested in her character. For one, she's a time traveler sent back from the future for an undefined reason. Why? It's never said outright, so it does allow for some mystery to build. Another factor is during the Sai story arc, an argument breaks out, which I will try my least to spoil, but while still telling you this, in which Kyon is told about how the rest of the group may not be who they play themselves off as. This was kind of interesting and did allow for a bit more mystery to the stories and the characters. Mikuru isn't a great character by any stretch, as she's really just played as a secondary love affair for Kyon, but she does offer a bit of mystery, so I'll let her pass. Finally, we have Koizumi, and he falls pretty much into the same hole that Mikuru does, as in, he doesn't really have much to offer, but he really isn't all that bad. Who he is pretty much the one who agrees with Haruhi, filling in the last gap of generic friends. And he is the one who introduces the gray spaces that Haruhi makes whenever she is angry or upset, or anything else of the sort. He's probably the most mysterious of the bunch since his attitude almost seems unnatural, sort of the type you wouldn't want to be alone with. His optimism almost seems sarcastic, and within the same story arc as Mikuru, it is told that his personality may just be an act. He doesn't really tend to push the story forward, except for a few times where it seems really forced, as in the Lonely Island Syndrome story arc, where he just so happens to be filthy rich, where he just so happens to have an uncle who owns an island and, spoiler alert, so happens to be able to set up a murder just to please Haruhi and keep her from suffering from withdrawal of extraordinary events. The side characters to the series really aren't anything great, since most of them get very little screen time, and when they do get screen time, they're okay, but there's really nothing phenomenal about them. In my opinion, even though this really isn't anything new, the characters are fun and interesting to follow, and there was a lot for me to like here. Despite some of these minor gripes, there is something that really made this a great watching experience that almost anyone, even people who hate the series, can agree on, and that is the excellent visuals and dubbing of the anime. It's truly something to marvel at, and is why some people who dislike the series say that there was a lot of missing potential here, as you can see that there was a lot of work thrown into this series. Most of the cast voices do very well with the material that they were given, and does allow for a lot of immersion, as almost none of the actors are either over the top, except for Nagato, who is a little bit underplayed, but I think that was supposed to be with her character. Now it seems I've been putting off a lot that seems to upset me, but need not wait anymore. Let's delve into what strays many away from the show itself. This is something I've been putting off for a good bit now. One of the show's most glaring flaws, the god powers. This is what I consider to be the biggest hindrance to the show, as it ruins Haruhi and the show itself for many as it focuses around this aspect. It makes the audience feel like she's just some needy child who's only satisfied once her needs are met and everything goes her way, and for many, this is exactly how she is portrayed, just as a whiny kid who, if she doesn't get what she wants, will rend reality to her liking and make it so. Many are able to overcome this fact, as she's not completely unlikable, as she does veer towards the fun-loving side of life that most of us have neglected ourselves, but it is something that needs to be addressed, as it could have been handled much better. As in, it could have been much more varied. Yes, this still would have made her whiny, but she could have acted in many different ways besides being a hindrance to most of what the group does, but most of what the stories consist of is just keeping Haruhi happy, and while the circumstances may change, the conflict remains the same, and only a few stories seem to grasp this problem and change it up. I do admit the first story really did this well, as it did hold a lot of suspense, and it did push what could happen if Haruhi was upset to possibly the furthest in the series. Although where the anime failed with the god aspect, the manga, as it did go a bit further and still continues to this day, succeeds. A bit more. A prime example of this is the Lovers at First Sight arc, as it focuses on Nagato rather than the usual Kyon and Haruhi stories that the series has held firmly for most of the time. This is something the show could have improved on greatly, as it could have taken the god aspect in different directions from time to time, rather than Haruhi just being the time bomb that she is. A good way this could have been helped is if Haruhi's powers had other effects rather than reality shattering or time gaps being ripped from history. Again, I will get to this little gimmick in the story later. All around, this is a big problem, but it's something that fans have gotten around or even enjoy. It seems to be a big matter of opinion as to whether or not this seems fun to you or not. For me, I honestly didn't mind it, but it did seem to make the series drag near the end, as it did seem to get old. Now, for what is my biggest gripe with the show, the extremely pointless and gimmicky story arc, The Endless Eight, and boy am I going to be rambling. What The Endless Eight was an 8-part, big shocker there, repetition of the same episode with an exception of the last episode and various moments within the episodes themselves. Now, I don't have a problem with repeating a series of events as long as it offers something new or at least interesting, as if it were to have taken a Groundhog Day approach. Now, I'm going to be giving away a few spoilers, but after the first few times, trust me, you'll have stopped caring. The plot of this story arc is that it's the last few weeks of summer, and Haruhi has events planned for every day of these 2 weeks. Soon the group finds out that these events have been going on for close to 500 some years.
Remember everything?
Yes,
Really? So how many times has this happened to us?
this would be 15,498 times.
15,498? What do you mean 15,498? What are you saying, Nagato?
And this is because Haruhi isn't satisfied with what's been happening. Again, another reason why many hate the character. Now they have to figure out what's keeping these 2 weeks from being perfect. I'll say this is an interesting concept, as it was fairly interesting to watch the first time through, and when I saw the second episode, I thought they were going to go for like a Groundhog Day approach and have Kyon trapped in this endless loop, but after sitting through the beginning, my expectations were quickly shattered. Now you may wonder why I'm dwelling on something that seems insignificant. I mean, what's one bad story in a series? Well, the big problem with this is that in episode count, it accounts for about a third of the show's length. So it's a huge waste of time, and whenever I look back at it, they could have, no, should have made some more material that strayed from the manga instead of this little gimmick. Sorry, but it drives me crazy to think that they did that, and that I watched through it in the vain hope that maybe it would have changed at some point. But nope, nothing changed. Now you're probably saying, well, would you have just rather have had them remove this story and then just stick with the books? I mean, didn't you want them to veer from the books? And I would say, yes. There's no reason for this to exist, other than the false hope that there may be something here worth watching, when there really is only the last and maybe first episodes if you want to see what one of the failure endings is like. Other than these, the series does suffer from some small repeating problems, such as I pointed out earlier, that every time the group finds themselves in a troubling situation, it always seems to be solved by Nagato. I have no problem with her personality, and I like her character myself, as I point out, but she's just relied on too much for many of the conflicts to actually add any weight to the series, and she seems to be able to do anything as long as it's convenient to the plot. Her powers are even used to win a baseball game. A baseball game of all things. Don't you think there's something more important she could be doing? So it seems that a lot of these conflicts have a predictable outcome, but again, when it strays from these little nuisances that the plot likes to grip to, the series does work really well, and I do get very invested in what it has to offer. All in all, if something's popular, most times it isn't as good as it's made out to be. Although I'm not sure if that's completely true in this case. Yes, the show does have many flaws, but there's always something that's keeping me from saying that I'm not a fan myself. Maybe it's the fun-loving nature of the show when it's not being unsettled by the faulty god aspect. Or maybe it's the amazing artwork and voice acting that prevents the visuals and audio from being boring. There's a lot to like here, but then again there's also a lot to hate. It's one of those shows you have to watch to see if you like it or not, since many seem to take it either way. It's either you love it, you hate it, or you fall somewhere in the middle territory of meh. The sheer size of the fan base is something to marvel at, so it's truly something people have come to adore, which is one of the biggest reasons I can say it's worth checking out. It offers a good bit of humor and suspense where it's needed, and does throw a good few curveballs to keep things interesting.
Don't be shy! Louder! Project from the diaphragm!
The stares from the families watching us are starting to hurt.
Okay, good! Let's do this for real! Unleash the beam! Me got a beam!
What?
Finally, despite all of its flaws, I give the series a good 6.5 out of 10. Also, the way I'm working my scale, a 5 is about an average anime, 10 being perfect, and 0 being awful, horrible, etc. So I find it falls somewhere above an average series. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I hope to do more of these in the future. Until next time, bye bye.